Uh, Good morning, everyone. My name is Fauzia Kunyenji. I work with the International Refugee Rights Initiative. The last, I think, was roads. D. I'll go with Djibouti.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Very excited to be here. My name is Kabajongu Shalin, and I am coming from Willow International. I work as a prevention coordinator. And what was the last? I'll go with Ireland.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Daisy Navasitu, and I'm a PhD candidate at National University of
Anjabat RDC Sinjro. I'm also a PhD candidate at Bishop Stewart University. The last letter was A, Africa.
Morning, everyone. Openg Shafik is my name. I work with the Refugee Law Project as a video advocacy officer. The last letter was A, America.
Good morning. My name is Martha Akello, and I work as the Program Manager Media for Social Change at the Refugee Law Project. The last letter was A, Atlanta. It's a city somewhere, I think.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Patricia Tim, and as has been mentioned, I lecture at the School of Law, Makerere University. I think I'm the oldest here. But I'm challenged by Commissioner Mondo. So the last letter was A, and I'll say Argentina. Thanks.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Devota Nwe. I work with Refugee Law Project as head of programs. The last letter is still A. I'll go with Aruba.
Aruba. So thank you so much, everyone. It's been a pleasure. Just a kind reminder, we have participants online. So as we speak, let's be a bit louder and clearer so that our participants
privileged to have, among those online, I know logged on time, the UN Special Rapporteur on trafficking persons, especially women and children, Professor Siobhan Mulali. She's online and she's with us, extremely keen to follow this conversation. We are here for a roundtable dialogue. The Dialogue RLP, the Refugee Law Project, is participating in partnership, of course, with our research partner, the Irish Center for Human Rights, which is headquartered at the National University of Ireland in Galway. We are very glad to have an able participant from the university, Daisy, who is a PhD candidate there under the supervision of Professor Mulali. We're so glad that Daisy could make it in person and Professor Mulali could make it online. We have a lot of other participants who are equally important and useful to this conversation. We are so glad for them. Can we have one to speak? We will catch up. Between the field of trafficking on the one hand and the field of forced displacement on the other. This particular dialogue is interrogating the nexus between those two supposedly separate fields and yet inextricably linked. I hope you'll agree with me that the time is now and it has never been timelier to talk about these two fields in juxtaposition, given the very experience and the lives of the vulnerabilities we interface with that sometimes do not recognize those separate fields. I will invite Devota Nue to come and give us opening remarks in view of setting the day in motion. Oh, or maybe we should start with our very own host. Maybe we should start with our very own host being... excuse me for the protocol, Patricia. Patricia, we are hosted by the School of Law, and I think protocol demands that you speak first. I'm sorry, Patricia.
Okay. Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, just to recognize the protocols, Office of the Prime Minister, the Irish Center for Human Rights, the Director of Public Prosecutions, heavily represented by two able ladies. One was my classmate, the other was my senior classmate, mentor. I'm a very lucky young old in particular, and in particular the School of Law, is able to realize its mission, which is committed to providing transformative and innovative teaching, learning, research, and services responsive to the dynamic national and global needs. And as the MC said, human trafficking, forced migration are now global issues that we must discuss. And I'm happy that the participants here, from at least listening to the introductions, are very key stakeholders in this country when dealing with this subject. We thank all participants, those physically and virtually present, for taking part and the time to engage in this conversation amidst the realities of the new normal as impacted by the COVID-19 pandemic. Trafficking in persons and forced migrations are not new occurrences in our societies or countries. In spite of the various laws adopted by the international community and the different countries, including Uganda, specifically the Prohibition and Prevention of Trafficking Act. These practices, trafficking in person and forced migrations, continue to persist. As I read the concept notes inviting us for this dialogue, I pondered and thought, what then is forced migration? And these are aspects we must make clear, even for our students online. What is forced migration? How can we define it? How different is forced migration from forced displacement? Are they one and the same thing? Can you use the terms interchangeably? I've looked at the program lineup and I see very eminent speakers, and I hope the clarification of these terminologies will be delved in by Dr. Chris Dolan, who I've seen handsomely on the virtual space, waiting to take us through. The United Nations Commission for Refugees in 2020, in its Global Trends of Forced Displacement report, stated that it's estimated in that report that global forced migration surpassed 80 million at mid-year 2020 globally. Of this, some 79.5 million people had been forced from their homes due to persecution, conflict, and human rights violations. This total includes 45.7 million internally displaced persons and 29.6 million refugees and other forcibly displaced outside their country, and 4.2 million asylum seekers. Existing and new conflicts and the novel coronavirus has dramatically affected their lives in 2020. That is a report by the UNHCR. So the crisis moves on. It's getting worse by the year. The pandemic has thrown in another spanner, exacerbating the situation, as clearly stated in the concept note and also in the UNHCR report. So that means we must continue the hard work that we are doing in our different capacities. Furthermore, the report notes that resettlement travels for refugees was on temporary hold due to the COVID-19 restrictions from March to June. Consequently, only 17,400 refugees were resettled in the first 6 months of 2020, according to government statistics, which is half the figure in 2019. So what does this mean? Were the refugees then forced to be forced migrants, find their way somewhere as forced migrants globally? Furthermore, there appears to be a distinction between refugees and forced migrants. Without preempting any discussion, as we shall hear in the course of the day, I hope the distinction will be made extremely clear to all participants, as it's pertinent as we design our programs and laws in order to make strategic interventions to address these issues or problems or challenges that we are having globally. What then is the nexus, I also pondered, between forced migration, forced displacement, refugees, asylum seekers, and trafficking in persons? Trafficking in persons is as a result or usually for the purpose of sexual exploitation, forced labor, services, slavery, practice similar slavery, servitude, forced begging, removal of organs. These days, we've seen communications also on WhatsApp telling us to be careful or otherwise people are trafficking people to remove kidneys, etc. However, what's the distinction between human trafficking and human smuggling? I looked up some material according to Christina Kangaspunta and Andy Guth in their article, Trafficking in Persons, Trends and Patterns. It's available online once you Google. They state that smuggling in persons is a crime against the state, involving facilitation of illegal crossing of borders for a fee. Whereas trafficking is or human trafficking is a crime against a person involving the ongoing exploitation of another human being in forced labor or forced prostitution. That is just really a pinch of salt, I think, in terms of distinguishing the two terminologies and practices, and I hope Dr. Chris Donald will make that clear as he goes about indicating that nexus in terms of his presentation. Uganda has also defined prevention of trafficking in persons, under its Prevention of Trafficking Act of 2009. And I would request the students online to probably find that act and address your minds to it for a detailed understanding or definition of trafficking in persons. To me, I found Section 15 of the Trafficking in Persons Act also quite interesting, that guarantees victims the rights to restitution to recover the following: costs of medical and psychological treatment, costs of physical and occupational therapy and rehabilitation, the costs of necessary transportation, temporary housing and child care, costs of reintegration in society, any other costs that the court may deem fit. Uganda as a state has also established the Coordination Office for Prevention of Trafficking in Persons. I think the Deputy Director is here. So we'll be happy to hear from her and from the DPP how far we are working. Is the Coordination Office well facilitated to execute its mandate? What are the challenges that it's faced with in executing its mandate? And how are we performing following the passing of the Trafficking in Persons Act, the signing or ratification of the different international instruments, and now the establishment of this coordination body to prevent trafficking in persons? How is Uganda performing? We highly commend and applaud the state for taking these strides and measures in trying to combat trafficking in persons. And we wish to hear more from the entities on the rights of victims, especially Section 15. To what extent are the victims getting the compensation that the law allows them to get? The UNHCR and other UN agencies in its report titled Human Trafficking stated that the United Nations advocates for a comprehensive approach to preventing and combating trafficking and recommends a victim-centered and human rights-based approach. Trafficking is a criminal offense, and it is the trafficker and not the victim who should be punished. So to what extent is Uganda really observing that victims, survivors of trafficking in persons, have their rights observed, and when rescued from this situation, they have compensation measures addressed to redress the violations that they have faced, and who anyway is supposed to compensate? Is it the perpetrators? Is it the state of Uganda, for instance, or a respective country? And how can our young Ugandans, especially we have the students virtually here, what contributions can they make to reduce this problem of trafficking in persons? What is their role in this entire discourse? How does all this trafficking in persons, forced migration, forced displacement, how then does it also relate to the whole new question of expropriation of labor? I'm happy Commissioner Mondo is here from Ministry of Gender, that is really handling the whole issue about expropriation of labor in this country. I hope we shall also get time, have the time to hear from you and to elucidate further on these aspects. Ladies and gentlemen, as I conclude my opening remarks on behalf of the principal, I would like to say that as we leave this dialogue, we must all think about the transformations we can do in our respective capacities to contribute towards combating trafficking in persons and forced displacement. We should not leave the discourse here. Enjoy the nice cake, the nice food, and call it a day. Prisons, we should all think through our role in protecting the victims and survivors and who may find themselves in this horrifying and horrendous situation. Otherwise, on behalf of the Principal School of Law and on my own behalf, I wish you all fruitful deliberations. Thank you.
Thank you so very much. Thank you so very much, Patricia, our team. How could we not have you to grace this occasion? And thank you so much for setting us in motion. It's always important to hear the scholarly voice, giving us citation, but also linking the theory to the practice. It's also difficult to speak after the scholar, because what else should I comment other than say, yes, I concur. And indeed, I concur, and I hope the participants, both in the physical and the virtual space, are concurring with Patricia that it's high time that we really take this conversation on its horns. Being a vice, being an offense, being a plight also, both trafficking in persons and forced migration, cannot be left to whom it may concern. And the time is now for us to be part of solution and not just part of the lament. On the program, we have Dr. Chris Dolan, the director of Refugee Law Project, to give us welcoming remarks. He's in the virtual space and is following up these proceedings, but is ably represented by all the staff here of Refugee Law Project. And on that note, I want to, together with me, to take note of the fact that we are having Devota Nuwe, who is going instead and valably give the opening remarks in lieu of Chris Dolan. Thank you.
Thank you, David. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for braving the rain. Good morning to our online participants. Thank you for making it. I'm giving these remarks on behalf of Dr. Chris Dolan. He's also joining us online. All protocols observed. There are so many dignitaries in this room, and Patricia mentioned all of them. So this is the second roundtable that we are holding to discuss human trafficking and looking at the nexus between forced migration and human trafficking. The last event was held in November 2019, but we couldn't hold another roundtable in 2020 because of COVID, but we did have some webinars. This event is jointly sponsored we have a joint collaboration, Refugee Law Project and the Irish Center for Human Rights. So as David acknowledged, and we also graced by the Professor Siobhan Mulali, who's the Special Rapporteur, Trafficking of Persons, especially women and children. Sorry, the mask is disturbing me as I speak, so I'll just lower it for a moment. When it comes to looking at the nexus between human trafficking and forced migration, one thing we have to agree is that victims of human trafficking can either be refugees or nationals. It doesn't matter. That the drivers are the same, are almost the same. When you look at the exploitation, and because the human trafficking, we have forms of exploitation like forced labor, forced criminality, child sacrifice, sexual exploitation, and all these forms of human trafficking also apply to refugees. When you also look at the risks of human trafficking, it's also in the externalization of labor for Ugandans, and also for refugees. Refugees can also be victims. When it comes to forced migration, for human trafficking, during flight to Uganda from various countries, you find that refugees pick people along the way and bring them to Uganda. So during the interviews, as a caseworker, you're not sure if someone has been trafficked into the country or they have actually been brought by a good Samaritan. It's usually a thin line when they're explaining. And when they come to Uganda, you find that a refugee who has been brought as part of a family, as a form of thanking the family for helping them flee, you find that they are doing all the housework in the home. So that's a form of forced labor. Then also the addition of children, borrowing of children. I think we've seen it in the refugee settlements, where children are borrowed and added onto ration cards and used. That can also be a form of human trafficking. And then even in resettlement, you find that families, UNHCR and other partners have to go through a best interest determination to actually make sure that children are not being trafficked and are not being illegally taken out of the country. So it's a difficult question when you're looking at human trafficking. So today we shall be examining the nexus between human trafficking and forced migration. So how does it happen between in conflict situation, during flight, and also in the country of asylum, and also when they return? So these are some of the questions that we'll be looking at. And we have a diverse group of participants here from the government, practitioners, from the DPP, and we'll be really having a discussion. We have a last session from midday to 1 o'clock, where we'll be having a general plenary discussion and we shall be getting ideas and looking at gaps of where human trafficking can actually occur in a forced displacement situation. I will not say much because Patricia ably talked about the law and gave a very good introduction, but that's why we are here today. Thank you for honoring our invitation. We are here for a half day, and we look forward to the discussions today. Thank you. Sorry, David is not here, so I will go ahead to the next program. So in the next session of the program is we are going to have a presentation by Assistant Director Rachel Bikole, and she'll be looking at human trafficking at the national level. Rachel, you're welcome. And then after that we shall go for a tea break.
Good morning once again. I already introduced myself. So, in the office of the DPP, we have prioritized human trafficking or trafficking in persons as an offense. In our in our plan, the Human Trafficking Division falls under the International Crimes Department, where I'm the deputy head. And under human trafficking in the ODPP, we prosecute human trafficking as both international and also domestic. So our mandate of the ODPP, like we all know, is to direct police to investigate any information of a criminal nature. And in handling human trafficking cases, we work hand in hand with the police. And we have enjoyed this relationship because we have now embraced what we call prosecution-guided investigations in most of the human trafficking cases that we handle. And we believe that, and we've seen the results of human trafficking, of prosecution-guided investigations. It has led to a lot of identification of cases, management of victims, and having more cases filed in court. So at the Office of the DPP, we have also engaged various stakeholders in handling our cases. We work with various civil society organizations. We are part of the COPTIP, and we are the lead agency for prosecution. So as a result of this collaboration, as a result of this engagement, we have gone a long way in identifying many human trafficking cases, and particularly in integration of the victims after the judicial process. So ODPP was also part of we're also part in the drafting of the national referral guidelines that came out last year, that were launched on the World Against Trafficking in Persons. And the guidelines help with management of victims of trafficking in Uganda. We have also come up with national referral guidelines for the Office of the DPP at our level. And as a result of these guidelines for victims, we have an officer who is directly in charge of handling victims of trafficking. So when cases come from police and victims of trafficking are identified, in most cases we do not have funds. Police and DPP do not have funds to cater for these victims, particularly where we establish that they need assistance, or where we need to separate them from the offenders, especially where the offenders are probably persons that were living with, persons in authority over them. So what the victim coordinator in ODPP does is to help connect the victims in the various cases to the various organizations. So this was brought about by the Human Trafficking Institute, and we work closely with the Human Trafficking Institute, and they are based at the Office of the DPP. So the Human Trafficking Institute brought on board that victim coordinator, and then also brought on board someone to help with the data management, to help with our statistics, because what we realized in the Office of the DPP was that what was being reported or captured as trafficking in person statistics was just 20% of what the office was actually handling. So this was so these efforts came in force only in December 2020, and so far we have had various victims connected to various organizations. And then at the office of the DPP, we also have 16 regions countrywide. And in all these regions, we have trained 227 prosecutors. We trained them in 220, particularly in relation to trafficking in persons, in identification and charging trafficking in persons cases. We also trained them in trauma-informed care and victim-centered approaches to trafficking in persons. This training was conducted by the Office of the DPP in collaboration with the Human Trafficking Institute, Willow International, and other agencies. So we also availed them resources, the acts. What is really, I'm not saying it's funny, but what was surprising is that during the training, even most prosecutors did not know what trafficking in persons is. The judges didn't know what trafficking in persons is, and yet we were expecting them to handle these cases, given that most of them are in the field and some of these cases originate from the field. So as part of the training, we made sure that every station, every region, and every station was given the Prevention of Trafficking in Persons Act, and this is the principal legislation managing trafficking in persons cases. We also gave them a charge manual to help with charging trafficking in persons cases, best practices manual, and then we had an investigative checklist. So this training was for prosecutors, and in some regions, like in I say Arua and Soroti, we still have police prosecutors because the number of state attorneys is low. So we also trained some police officers as well, and provided the resources. So as a result of this training, we opened up a WhatsApp group for the Office of the DPP and police. And the purpose of this WhatsApp group is to help manage trafficking in persons cases. So when the police, whoever identifies the trafficking in persons cases, brings it on board on the WhatsApp group, and then if they have any challenges in relation to handling these cases, they are also addressed on the WhatsApp group. So this is very professional. And we actually have realized that through these engagements with the field stations, with the various police officers, we are guiding many of our investigators and many of our police officers in handling these tip cases. And then we also established the trafficking in persons focal persons at all DPP stations, and distributed and gave them case logbooks to register all trafficking in persons cases. So what these tip focal persons do is they provide a monthly reporting of all the tip cases that take place, and then in return we centralize this information and we give it to Agnes there for the COP tip to go in the national, to be captured nationally. So we are also doing the case tracking of all cases of trafficking in persons. And so what happens with focal persons is that if you have a case, say in Busia, a case of trafficking in Busia, you just contact the focal person, and then they'll give you details about the case. And where we realize that they need help, we come in instantly. And then also they submit monthly returns to head office, so we can know how many cases of trafficking have been registered in each station in the district. The focal persons are at every station, so they submit their statistics or data to the regional office, and then the regional office submits to us at head office, and then we compile the data. So we believe that as a result of this, we have registered many more cases that we had never registered before. And remember, we're downgraded to Tier 2 watch list. But because of these results, we realized that we had not been capturing the efforts that we were doing, because we're only capturing statistics at headquarters, and not concentrating on what was going on in the field stations. Yeah. And so far at headquarters only, we have over 75 cases under investigation and prosecution, under prosecution. And we have 365 cases under investigation. All these are cases of trafficking in persons. So we also have, over 6 cases that are under prosecution guided investigations. So this is where the prosecutor joins the police to go on the ground and help in investigating the case. And then at High Court only, I'm talking of the International Crimes Division of High Court. We have 23 cases ongoing, over 23 cases that are ongoing. And then 10 of these cases involve intense victim protection efforts. And so from the, since the COVID, from the COVID period, that's March 2020 to date, we have filed over 220 trafficking in persons cases. And of these, we have filed them in court. This is nationwide. And of these, we have 161 that are domestic or internal in nature, and we only have 41 that are transnational or international in nature. So of these cases, we have 283 accused persons or defendants with 342 victims. So most of these trafficking in persons cases involve sexual exploitation. Most of them captured around this period involving sexual exploitation. And of the cases so far filed, we have registered only 11 convictions. This is for the COVID-19 year. So the number of conviction is still low, probably because during the pandemic, the courts were only registering cases and taking plea and not hearing cases. So the witnesses were, so we are not actually, trial had not taken place in these cases. Most of our cases have just been slated for trial around this period. So we believe that our conviction rate will gradually improve. But so far, we registered, for the whole year, we registered only 11 convictions. Yeah. And from our data, most of the traffickers were male. So at least 68% of the suspects and accused persons were male. And at least 70% of the victims were female. And 60% of the victims were children. Remember, during this time, most of the children were at home, and they went through a lot of exploitation. So aggravated trafficking in children was the most common trafficking in persons charge that we registered. And the ODPP Kampala region has about 16 stations that include Buganda Road, Luwero, there are about 16. We have Buganda Road, Luwero, we have Mwanga 2, regions around Kampala. It had the most filed trafficking in persons cases, probably because the people there were more now enlightened, and the police as well. And this was followed by Mbale region. Most of the cases registered in Mbale region was as a result of sexual exploitation. And then also we had Nakawa region. Those three were the leading regions that had the most cases filed. And at least from the cases registered, we had 75% of them were domestic cases. So what is our current and future projection? So we we are currently looking at moving the trafficking in persons cases to complete conclusion or resolution, and also increasing the conviction rate. We are not actually being conviction based, but we need to have the cases that have been filed go through the system such that they can be concluded, and this will help us to inform on the trend, the regional trends, and the case typologies of the cases we are registering. We also believe that we should, in addition, have more training for ODPP prosecutors, training in terms of identifying and charging the cases, because these are the foot soldiers and they are the ones where most cases are identified. So we need them to really be informed about the changing trends of the crime and everything. And then because most of our trafficking in persons cases are handled by the International Crimes Division of High Court, so the trial is a bit prolonged. We have the pre-trial stage, then we have the trial, and then the sentencing. So all this, we have to train the ODP prosecutors and the police. Because pre-trial is just like where a panel of, actually it's one judge. Unless the case is complicated, then you have a panel of 3 judges. They first evaluate the case to see whether the case is sufficient. You have sufficient evidence for trial. And if you don't have, then the case can be dismissed at that stage before it's actually set for trial. So it's a bit of more work for us, but we welcome it since that's the procedure of the court, and we have to be ready to take it on. Yeah, and when a case has gone through pre-trial and then the trial stage, and when you get a conviction, you're finally convinced that actually you had the right, you had the right investigations, you had the right person, because it has already gone through the various checks and balances. And then we also project to have more victim-centered or referral service trainings, such that when cases are identified, we look at also the victims first. In the past, we have been conviction-based, where we have, when you have your case and you go to court, what you mind about is getting a conviction, and that's all. We didn't know what would happen to the victims. But now with this, we are trying to train our prosecutors to be more victim-centered, to have a victim-centered approach to handling the case, and particularly knowing how to reintegrate the victims after the case. And then we also intend to have more training with police. The Human Trafficking Institute, I think, has already entered into an arrangement with the police to train them still on identification and charging of these cases. And actually, this is very important because we recently had a case that was identified in, this is near Bakuli. There's a hotel near Bakuli there. The owner was the manager of the hotel. I'll not mention the hotel. Had various waitresses who are working as waitresses during the day, but at night they were turned into, at night they had to service the various customers that would come in, and it was actually, they were sexually exploited, and the money that was coming from the sexual exploitation was being handed to the manager early every morning. So when the police rounded up these girls, they had first of all gotten them on charges of prostitution. But because the police officers around there were really informed about trafficking, when they interrogated the case further, they realized that actually these were not they were not suspects of prostitution, but they were victims of trafficking, because they realized that during night they were sexually exploited, and all the money was being collected by the manager, and the manager would give them back only 10,000 each. So those are some of the benefits of training together. And then also training police on the investigations best practices. Similarly, we also need training with the judiciary. We need to engage with the judiciary. The ODPP, in partnership with the Human Trafficking Institute and the Judicial Training Institute, have already agreed on a judicial training in trafficking in persons, particularly in identifying cases and charging, in victim trauma, and in court best practices. So what happens is, in most cases, the police may be informed about trafficking. The prosecutors are informed on what to do. But when the case comes to court, usually the judicial officers are not well acquainted with what trafficking is. So the offense of trafficking has been around for more than 10 years, but not everyone is really, it seems like it's a new offense to most of the judicial officers. Yeah. And when it comes to sentencing, we also need training to train the judicial officers, because usually what comes out when we go to court is if the sentence is very lenient, the blame comes back to the office, to the prosecutors, you know, saying that why are we getting, especially COPTIP, when you go to COPTIP, your ODPP is always roasted for getting very lenient sentences. You know, police takes effort, probably together with Interpol, to arrest and to apprehend a suspect of trafficking, and when they are returned, probably they're just fined maybe like 2 million or given a month or 2 months, you know, imprisonment, which is not commensurate to the efforts that police and ODPP took in arresting and also going through the whole trial. So we believe that when it comes to sentencing, and rather when it comes to judicial training, these are some of the issues that we need to identify, issues particularly to sentencing, and also the remedies. So the Trafficking in Persons Act provides for remedies for victims. Unlike maybe in other jurisdictions, in Uganda, the remedies available to the victims are conviction-based. So we have restitution that's provided for under Section 15. We have compensation, and then confiscation and forfeiture of proceeds of trafficking. So for restitution, it's an order that court grants in addition to any other punishment that may have been meted out for all the expenses that the victim of trafficking may have incurred, or the organization that was helping the victim may have incurred. And these may include probably medication, or, you know, maybe repatriation and all that. So, and then for compensation, this is basically maybe for damages and everything. Then confiscation and proceeds of trafficking. This remedy is like I said again, conviction based. But unlike for restitution and compensation, which court can just award depending on how you have presented the case, of course we need to guide the court. We need to provide the evidence of the costs incurred before they can come up with compensation. So confiscation and forfeiture of proceeds of trafficking, there has to be a direct link that the proceeds that the trafficker got were actually as a result of engaging in the crime of trafficking. So the role of the prosecutor is to assist the victim to ensure successful execution of the court orders. So far, we have had 2 cases where compensation has been meted out to the convict. That's the case of Uganda versus Natkunda Faith, and also the case of Uganda versus Umutoni Annette. In Natkunda Faith, compensation of 5 million was awarded. But of course, 5 million was awarded to the victims of trafficking. And we believe that this was not commensurate to the kind of exploitation that the victims had really undergone. So what we do is that in our investigations and in our prosecutions, we try to bring out every detail to court. You know, we try to, you know, if there are any medical bills, if there are, you know, any repatriation costs and whatever costs that have been incurred, we try to present them to court such that if court is to award the compensation or restitution, at least it's commensurate to, what we expect. So we have been very slow in in praying for these remedies, but increasingly we are informing the prosecutors and police that we have to pray for these remedies, because most of our cases were not taking off because victims, accused persons, were more interested in settling the cases out of court. So they wanted a quick, a quick settlement whereby they would give the money to the victims, and we would end up with no victims in court and all that. But now what we tell the victims is that, even in court we have restitution and compensation and all that. Yeah. So my time is out, but of course I wanted to look at the challenges briefly. Okay, for maybe just 2 minutes. Yeah, so of course we have some challenges that ODPP in handling trafficking persons. For instance, lack of standard procedures or awareness in the criminal justice system. We have some training, but it's not really specialized to trafficking, so we need to enhance on the training. And then the resources and financial investigations, most times we get stuck because the investigations are really costly, especially if they are cross-border and all that. And then survivor challenges, much as we have a victim coordinator at ODPP, sometimes it's hard. It's hard for them to, because most organizations where she connects them to are specific. You may find Willow takes only female, you may find Champis only takes children. So if you have a male victim of trafficking, so it brings in a bit of challenge. And then lack of sufficient victim-centered or trauma-informed criminal justice approaches. And sometimes victims of trafficking are still treated as criminals. So by the time we realize when they've gone through the justice system, it's like the harm would already have been inflicted upon them. And then we still rely too much on victim testimony. So we need to change this to more collaborating evidence, like maybe DNA evidence and forensic, evidence and all that. So we have tried to overcome these challenges through having specialized or dedicated teams through the various trainings, and then also increasing the criminal justice sector specialized training. So the judges now are more flexible in that they can allow to be trained with the police and the prosecutors for us to be on the same, on the same level of footing. And then prosecution-guided investigations have been embraced, most police officers have embraced prosecution-guided investigations and don't look at it as, eroding their investigative powers, but it's like more of a teamwork and working together. Yeah. And then we are trying to work on increased victim protection. In ODPP, we have a fully-fledged department for victim and witness empowerment. So we work together with them in ensuring that the victims are well protected and all that. And strong collaboration between government and civil society organizations and service providers. Thank you.
Thank you so very much, Rachel. We are not yet done with you for sure. We are not yet done with Rachel. Now some cases is starting to come. Now there is data. There is data to this discussion, and we thank so very much Rachel Bihole. I hope I pronounced the name very well. We are going to launch a very brief Q&A session because there is a lot of wisdom hovering over this room. There's a lot we have been subjected to in terms of listening and processing and thinking through our different places of work. We need to have a kind of bouncing off on this presentation. So I want to invite a very brief Q&A just before we can go for our well-earned break. The microphone will move around, but we're going to start with a particular question. Rachel, your former supervisor at the Irish Center for Human Rights, who is now the UN Special Rapporteur on trafficking in person, especially women and children. Very proud of your presentation. She has posted a question online. And we're going to start with Professor Mlali. She wants to know, does the ODPP notice any particular risks of trafficking faced by refugees and internally displaced persons in Uganda? I would love Rachel to comment on that. The question coming from the special rapporteur, and she's very much interested in that link. Maybe Rachel, we start with that.
Thank you. Of any national island girl.
Maybe we can trade off microphones because your voice is the most important now.
Thank you. I should have mentioned earlier that I'm a proud alumni of the National University of Ireland in Galway. Yeah. So at ODPP, I've given various statistics, but I've not broken down to the various categories. But we do notice that particularly in during this COVID-19, we had registered various reports of cases of trafficking against refugees. We have 3 cases in the system. We have 3 cases reported in the system. It's in Western Uganda. But of the 3 cases, they were under investigation, and we have not yet taken them to court. But in the past, we have handled some cases of trafficking persons against the refugees. So these are the cases in the system, but we believe that maybe we have many more cases. I mean, cases involving refugees. Pardon me for that.
From this plot. Thank you. No, thank you so very much, Rachel, for that. We are here because of we are a little bit concerned and dissatisfied with the way the whole conversation on trafficking in persons has always been carried on, and we are suspecting that forced migration. Of course, forced migration added some layer of vulnerability to this conversation. And many other vulnerabilities, including internally displacement and externally displacement and poverty and chasing of labor and all that. I'm sure there's some other questions, but let me say this by privilege of being the moderator. There is a WhatsApp group. There is a WhatsApp group. We heard this from the presentation that has been set out there, and is likely to deliver us from the second tier of trafficking in person and put us into a better light. I think that's a very welcome development. I was just wondering, with the internet shutdown, with the poor signal coverage across the country, with the not inexpensive bundles, with OTT, with battery charging, power cut, load shedding, and the fragility of smartphone, are we still taking it for granted that with the WhatsApp group says everything else will fall in place? Well, I leave it for all of us to think about. That it is one thing to put a solution to these things and the complexity of life and the lives we are in to really deliver us. But let me take some few questions from the room as well. Is there any burning question before we get back to the online participation? Is there any question to the presentation? Yes. There are 2 hands, now 3 and 4. We're going to take those, let's take this basket of questions, Rachel. and then we come back to you. 4 hands. Can I have the sanitizer?
Thank you so much. From the presentation, we realized that some of the victims of trafficking, in most cases, end up in reception centers for the case of refugees, especially the refugee children. So I would like to pose a question to OPM if there is a representative here. What measures have been put in place at the point of the reception centers to sort out these victims of trafficking and to prevent the chance of them being registered as probably family members to some of the refugees at this stage of registration? Thank you.
We have another hand.
Thank you, Rachel. I am Leku James, the district chairperson at Jumani. Happy to be here. I thought, Rachel, you will make corruption as one of the challenges in addressing this, but you left it out. My interaction with most of your officers at the district level is that this is a big challenge to curbing most of the vices that we are talking about here. And when we are here, we want the world to know, we want to be supported in fighting some of these vices. You find in those offices, I think you have a problem of supervision. The DPP's office has a problem of supervision. You must be able to supervise. The structures are there. Recently, you created structures, chief DPP something, but these people are not, do I say facilitated? They do not have the capacity to supervise. That's why you find cases like, there was a case in a certain district where a 24 person was classified, the file was sanctioned by the RSA as a defilement victim. 24 years. And this was realized in court. That means the RSAs do not have time to peruse through the files, but also there could be other motivations, because even when the error was glaring, the RSA was busy negotiating with the families that if you don't want me to continue with this case, bring some money. So this is going to affect the justice that we are seeking for when it comes to child trafficking and human trafficking in general. I thank you. I felt it should have been a very big, in bold letters actually, corruption. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you so very much for that question. I'm sure Rachel is taking note. Our cameras are static. I will suggest that maybe for the purposes of our camera to stand so that we can get you up. Yeah. And for the purposes of those online, so if you can reintroduce yourself before the question.
Hello, everyone. Once again, my name is Charlene Kavajungu, coming from Willow International, a non-governmental organization that works to support victims of human trafficking. And my question is on the side of the victims, the survivors of human trafficking. In the recent months, we've been having a training for survivors, particularly to teach them about their legal rights and how the processes in court go for purposes of them actually taking these cases, because that's an issue. Many of them experience the exploitation and decide to keep quiet about that. So that's a training that we've been having in the previous months, and quite a number of interesting issues came up for the survivors. One of them, they mentioned that many of them are arrested. This is particularly for those who are in external trafficking. They are arrested in these countries, for example, Oman, they're arrested in India, and quite a number get sentenced to 7 years, 20 years, for actually doing nothing. This is done by their bosses, the employers. So I'm wondering, are there any laws in place that can protect the survivors when they are in these situations? For example, when they're in Dubai, because many of them complain that other governments from other countries, for example, maybe China, they follow up on their citizens as they go to get employment in other countries. But Uganda, particularly, tebatufaako when we go, So that's a big issue. So what happens when this person is arrested for 7 years, 20 years? Is there a hope for them? Because many of them were mentioning they have friends who are stranded and they would want to see a way forward. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that voice. Tebatufaako. Many of them say so. I hope Rachel is taking notes. Let's take the other question from the representative of police.
The representative or DPP, Madam Rachel, thank you so much for your presentation. It was quite exciting. When it comes on the part of police on how we work with the ODPPP, you mentioned we've been in position to do quite a number of trainings with Uganda Police, but my concern still can remain on what kind of trainings are we conducting and for which groups. Because one thing we have to appreciate when it comes to especially cases of sexual and gender-based violence, working with refugees, and also to do with human trafficking. One thing we have to appreciate, most of our police officers are not doing that much very well. Because if I may know, the only groups you may be for now working with could be with Director Criminal Investigations, Department of SGBV. But you find even in most of the regions for Uganda, most of those desks are not in place. I happen to have done some project in Yumbe, in Ombechi, the refugee camp, but you find issues to do with cases of SGBV, talk about trafficking. Most of those police officers have nothing actually. They are not aware of most of these issues, especially when it comes to investigations. As training one time we had guided if it would be possible for us to work with ODPP to see which categories of police officers should we be training. Are we looking at training forensic officers who do the forensic bit of it? Are we training CIDs, the ones who do investigations, or even Interpol? So that bit of coordination will need to be improved. Otherwise, we thank you so much for so far what you have done when it comes to training for police, but we request still we can do more. Perhaps we can even work out to see which kind of syllabuses are we using, what curriculum do we use, because especially even with CIDs, we still have a lot to do when it comes to investigations. Director Public Prosecutions is not so much on board. So we can invite you to see how best we can improve. I thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so very much. It's coming from one side of the government to another. We shall hear Bwana RDC, and then we shall launch answers.
Thank you so much. As it is just question and answer session, I would also want to respond to some of the issue. One of the issues raised about, for instance, Uganda not responding while they are comparing it with China and other countries. Members, remember our systems are still growing. There's no way you can compare Uganda with America, for instance. It got independence in 1776, and Uganda is just of 1962. So the systems are still growing. Don't think Ugandans are not. Ugandan government is not caring. It's caring, but the system is still growing. See, now we are also trying to get some trainings. We are still crying. My issue is about provision of special courts and time limits for such a victims, suspects. As for example, the court sessions talking about elections. You see, there is a fixed time for hearing election petition, which is giving some hope to some of the victims in order to avoid this question of sorting out things outside court. So I think it's the question of delay. That's where the victims could feel like negotiating. And so I would think that if there could be a strategy or a way how we can have special courts for such victims, or something to do with a strategy of addressing them quickly. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you so much, member. We are going to go to the question, but let's start with the question which was directed to the OPM. We have the OPM ably represented here by Darson. There's a last question from the online participation. Is there any sound estimate of the percentage of refugees in a given population that experience human trafficking? That was a question that came from Chris Dolan, who is also keenly following the conversation.
Thank you. On that question, I can say no, because we have not been taking account of the trafficked cases. First of all, the challenge we have is who does identification of the trafficked cases among the refugees. Like my sister has said, the people that we work with, the officers from Office of the Prime Minister, have not received the training on identifying who is a trafficked case and who is a genuine refugee. So that one leaves them in suspense of who is a trafficked person, who is not a trafficked person. Because the trafficker will bring this child or this person in the name of bringing her or him to register as a refugee. But in the process, it needs a trained person to interrogate this child to understand the circumstances under which this child has been brought, which we don't have. So we cannot ably say that we have the statistics of the trafficked persons among the refugees.
Thank you so very much, Dalson. We will come back to this, but between our break tea and now stands Rachel. So Rachel, decide how much of the time will you give us so that we can get our tea. But it's a buffet of questions. Just give us the best of the answers in the shortest time.
Thank you. Actually, what we must admit as the Office of the DPP is that we have not taken so much keen interest in the refugees. What we report is what is availed, but we believe there are many more cases of exploitation taking place in the various camps, and it's an issue that we have to check up keenly. And then when it comes to corruption, we must say that corruption is not unique to trafficking in persons cases only. Corruption has to be wiped up at all levels. So it has to be a concerted effort. But that notwithstanding, we have a department of anti-corruption department in the ODPP, and in some cases where we have had some of our staff engage in corruption tendencies, they have been reprimanded. But those just are a few cases. And when it comes to charging, that's why we're saying that we are training most of our staff on case identification and charging of these cases correctly. So if a victim of 24 was charged with defilement, maybe that was an error and it's not right. But we can have a victim of age 24 or an adult as a victim of trafficking and charged with aggravated, trafficking in persons, depending on the circumstances of the case and the kind of exploitation that they underwent. So I think it depends on how the case has been analyzed. When it comes to victims being arrested, particularly transnational of crimes, I must say that I think on average we have had a reduction on the victims who are being arrested and charged, because we have entered into bilateral agreements with various countries I will give an example of Kenya. In the past, Kenya used to, when they would identify victims, they would charge them for various offenses like illegal entry, illegal stay, and all that. But since we had these agreements, they actually, when they identify victims, they get them rescued and they're not, being charged anymore. But when it comes to the Gulf countries where trafficking is prevalent, that's also another issue. We do have some bilateral agreements with some countries, like maybe Jordan, UAE. But the issue is implementation. That is where the challenge is. Because ideally, I think Ministry of Gender will help me here. They're supposed to be monitoring these companies when they, when there's labor exploitation, and there's a monitoring unit, but this falls under the docket of Ministry of Gender on how well it's being done. And then when it comes to special courts, it takes really a while to set up special courts, like maybe the anti-corruption court and all that. But what we have been doing is we have been having special sessions to fast track these cases. There was a special session in Mukono of human trafficking, particularly handling child sacrifice cases. And then currently there's a session going on at the International Crimes Division for trafficking in persons cases. So where funds are available, we try to organize the special sessions to fast track these cases.